doctrine. I think it's a
But you just did. You just did agree with me that it was a good principle. And who are we to question the greatest minds of
That's what I'm
Christendom?
saying. Who are we? That's what I'm saying. Who are we? Okay. I don't think that is something that I can find in the gospel. That's
Now,
not.
wait a minute. Are you a Catholic? I mean, what did Jesus Christ have to say about gas deregulation?
Yet, since according to Catholic teaching, the circumstances of actions, especially their end, come from Christ, they do not come from.
Wait, stop.
They come from the mind of humans. It's a human philosophy.
If you're saying he's jumping to a conclusion that is a false conclusion, and the church was fooled because of what I would call ahistorical Thomism.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode number 119 of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. This one has been a long time coming. I finally got to debate the just war theory with E. Michael Jones. It's a doozy. Get ready. But before I put that on, I just want to remind you that if you would like to discuss issues of war and peace and stimulate yourself intellectually this summer, I want to invite you to take my course on the Iliad for adults. It's going to be awesome. I mean, I hate to say it, but I think we can learn more about war and violence from Homer than we can from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. I know, I hate to say that, but the Church's teachings on war, I've been doing podcasts on this recently. We've talked about how there is some planned ambiguity going on there and kind of a lack of clarity when it comes to the two traditions in the Church. And what I love about reading Homer is that Homer gets it. And I really think that this, especially if you're interested in this podcast, if you've been around for a while, you know the kind of conversations we have. The kind of conversations that we're going to have in the class can be that much better with a group of people who have been kind of primed to think about the issues that we talk about on this podcast. I will be teaching the class, but it's mostly a book club for adults. So I will probably teach for about 15 minutes and then step back and let everybody discuss. And I can't wait to hear your thoughts. In every episode, I'm giving my listeners one reason why they should take the class. So I think this is reason number 3 would be that it was basically our first story in Western civilization. So, I think Gilgamesh is older or something, but this one is basically, as soon as the Greek alphabet was developed, Homer wrote this down, or somebody who knew Homer, or somebody who called themselves Homer. We don't really know, but it goes back to 850 BC, but the story dates back to the late Mycenaean civilization, the Trojan War, the era of the Trojan War, which was around 1250 BC, we think. So if you're going to read any literature at all, and Dr. Jones tells you to read literature, right? He's been scolding you and telling you, stop scrolling, start reading. Well, this is one way that you can do that. And if you're going to read any literature at all this summer, why not start with the first story, the first book, and see where it all began. Okay, so that's my third reason for you, and I'm going to let you enjoy the debate now. I don't know who won, but you can weigh in on the comments and let me know. All right, thanks for tuning in, and here we go. All right, welcome everyone to another episode of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. I'm thrilled to have back as a guest today Dr. E. Michael Jones. Dr. Jones, welcome back.
Thank you, Ellen. Ellen, good to be here.
All right, so we're continuing a conversation that we started a while ago. The first time you ever came on my podcast, it was because I picked up on your anti-war views, and you were one of the few Catholic intellectuals who was actually talking about war. And so that was 5.5 years ago. And now here we are, second Trump administration. Military recruitment numbers are up. What do you think about that?
It's a function of the economy.
Yeah.
Recruitment is always a function of the economy. And the economy, I know people, one of the main driving forces behind recruitment is student loan debt. They have created a situation where they'll pay off your student loans. So there will be, given the economy, given the propaganda ministry, there are going to be plenty of 18-year-olds who are going to line up and ready to die for Israel.
Yeah. I'm sure they're all Jews. They're lining up to go die for Israel, don't you
No,
think?
no, not at all. No, we clarified this long time ago. The interesting development now is apparently there has been a rift between Trump and Netanyahu, and Trump is very sensitive when it comes to his image. And sensitive to, you have to be a flatterer in order to be near Donald Trump. And apparently, Trump caught one of his, also values loyalty, and caught Mike Waltz having back channel communications with Netanyahu, trying to force his hand to get into a war with Iraq. He was furious. Waltz got fired, and now apparently he's not talking to Netanyahu. So,
Okay.
you
I mean,
know, I wish it were otherwise. I mean, I think that this man has lost a great opportunity. I don't know whether lost forever, but he should have just said, all right, no more foreign aid, no more money to the Ukraine, no more money to Israel. That's it. And then we'll start off from there. Start off with a clean slate. He could have dealt with the Houthis. Apparently, I don't know what the latest is, but apparently the Houthis, he has kissed and made up with the Houthis, which is also infuriating the Israelis. But it would have been very simple at the beginning if he had simply said, okay, I will guarantee that humanitarian aid gets into Gaza if you, the Houthis, stop firing on our ships. That would have solved that problem immediately. He would have looked like a great statesman. And the whole, now he's apparently got to go into that position anyway, with his tail between his legs, sort of. And now his fury at Netanyahu is finding expression in a deal with the Houthis and also a new deal with the Saudis, where he's not claiming that they have to establish relations with Israel as a condition for further aid or discussion.
yeah. I mean, I always had the feeling that Trump would not bring us into World War III. I felt like, I mean, despite all of his flaws, even the first time that he ran for president, it was very clear that he wanted to make peace with Russia. He wanted to be friends with Russia. He was not a warmonger. And it was Hillary Clinton the first time around who was a warmonger. So I've always had this hope, but then after he took so much money from the Jewish lobby and everything, I started to lose hope that he was just going to go all in. But he seems to be pulling back. What do you think was like, what do you think changed there? Like, it seems like for the first, several months, he was just sending all the arms over there and helping them wage their war / genocide.
His ego.
His ego.
I mean, I don't think that changed. I think that when Netanyahu tried to get around him, when Waltz and Netanyahu tried to go
Okay.
behind his back, he was furious because he's the guy. If he believes in one thing, he's the guy, the art of the deal. This is what he believes. And I think everything it has to be seen in that light. So, in other words, even the bombing campaign was a prelude to coming up with a deal. If you go back to the first Trump administration, he dealt in this way with North Korea. Huge type of threat, like it's going to be the end of the world and Korea is going to be reduced to rubble. And then he drops it. It's like he's simultaneously good cop and bad cop. So he's the same guy. He comes in as the bad cop, and then he sits down at the negotiating table and says, "Oh, just that's," and suddenly he's the good cop, and suddenly you get a deal. I think there's a psychological mechanism that he's relying on there that is the base of good cop, bad cop. That's the psychological mechanism, and he's both in one person. So you're so relieved now that he's not going to beat you up that you'll say, "Okay, I'll work with you."
Okay.
I think that everything has to be reduced to either New York real estate or professional wrestling. These are the two poles of Donald Trump's mind, and if you can
Yeah.
reduce it to one or the other, it's like he can understand it. But
Yeah.
those are the kind of simplistic things. There's no depth here, but there is a kind of. I think he's his own man. I mean, he took money. He took money from the Jews. It's obvious. It's
Yeah.
obvious that look. Let's just go to the tariff thing. The tariffs are a really complicated issue. I just wrote a long article on tariffs, and tariffs were essential to the creation of the United States of America. They basically created the industrial base of what became by the time of World War II, the greatest industrial power in the world. And they were
Hmm.
protected industries. Okay, that's good. That was good that we did that. But it's not a universal panacea. And you have to kind of look at a particular period of time to understand whether they're going to work or not. So obviously
Hmm.
at the beginning, when you have to nurture these young industries and you have to protect them against cheap manufacturers from England, which will flood the market and destroy any ability, any local economy. But
Yeah.
by the end of the 19th century, these little industries were so powerful that nobody could rein them in. They were called trusts or monopolies at that point. And
Hmm.
Theodore Roosevelt then had to do the opposite of what Alexander Hamilton had done at the beginning. So he comes in and he, slaps 145% tariff on China, like overnight,
Yeah.
with no preparation of anything. And the stock market crashes. And then 6 days later, he says, just kidding.
Yeah.
And then all of his billionaire buddies all made a killing on the stock market. And then he's proud of that fact. This is insider trading. And he's proud of this fact because he's a bottom line guy. If it's a lot of money, he's all for it.
Right.
This
Right.
shows you the limitations of this guy. So he kind of got it right. The tariffs were important or are important, had no idea of how to apply them. So he just acts impulsively at the
Yeah.
beginning when he's signing all these diktats,
Yeah.
ukases.
Well, and that's totally fair critique, but I think I'm a little frustrated that we're having these so many conversations about tariffs and things like race when this genocide is happening in Gaza. And I don't know about you, but I have not heard a peep about it from my priest. Have you heard a single homily in the last, what has it been, 3 years or 2.5 years? Have you heard anything about what is happening over there, about this war, about how many people have died, about anything? It's
Apparently,
the church is
so
not talking about it.
now hold on, hold on. It turns out that Pope Francis, in his doty, he's an old man. He's getting ready to die, but he was calling up Gaza every night. Now maybe he was saying something, but if the New York Times doesn't cover it, no other newspaper is going to cover it. So I think that what we had with the media was the creation of a particular pope. And this particular pope did not have, we couldn't hear anything about Gaza. We didn't hear
Yeah.
anything. Now, the new pope has today said something about Gaza, first thing out of the gate. Now, if you want my personal feelings on the matter, I wish that they had chosen Cardinal Pizzaballa, who is the Patriarch of Jerusalem, because that would have been an unmistakable sign that the church is going to deal with the Jewish question specifically
And
through
see,
Gaza.
through Gaza. And I've heard that that Jerusalem is like surrounded by wildfires right now that are like I don't know if you've heard this, but it was on Lou Rockwell today. There was a link about how none of the media is reporting this, but it's like an apocalyptic surrounding of fire. And this writer was writing about like what is this? This seems um symbolic or significant in some way. But I think that we need to move on from the JQ. And I'm
Wait,
proposing,
just a second here. If
yeah.
you're interested in fires, my assistant, the managing editor, Elisa Rangel, has done really good articles on those fires, the fires in Maui, for example.
Oh,
It's a really good article. She's done a lot of research on fires and floods, or basically the manipulation of what seem to be natural disasters for which we don't need a cause. But when you look at a place like Maui, where basically one part of the place got destroyed, the poor people's residences got destroyed, and then the real estate people come in and
yeah.
what should I say? Buy it up at pennies on the dollar because they drove out the natives. So anyway, I'm just recommending that. It's in Culture Wars magazine. It's in
Okay.
this issue. This issue.
Okay.
In addition to that, all of the battery issues, the Musk issues, the lithium, like the floods in North Carolina, will probably have to do with lithium and so on and so forth. Anyway, but to get back, so you think that we should just get over the Jewish question?
I think we need to move on from the JQ, and I've been doing podcasts on my channel on the JWQ,
Which is what?
the just war question. This is where
All
we
right.
need to,
State your case. State your case.
Mike, speaking of culture wars, I sent you a 12,000 word essay in which I stated my case.
Right.
Did
And
you
I
read
didn't-
it?
I did. I read it, and because I read it, I didn't publish it.
I know. So here's my question for you that
Do you want me to state my case?
I want to
I-
ask my question first.
I will just state why I didn't publish it, because I didn't want to, at this crucial moment when genocide is being committed in Gaza, I don't want to weaken the just war theory. And I think that's what you did. We needed to strengthen the just war theory because it's being egregiously violated by the Israelis right now in Gaza.
Okay, so what do you mean by weaken it? It was such a good article that made you think twice about the just war theory, didn't it? It called it into question. It called it into doubt.
You're right. Yes, you're right. It did call it into question.
It did. And you didn't want that. You didn't want people
I don't want to call the just war theory into question while genocide is being committed in Gaza, because just war theory is the opposite of genocide.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
Can I read something to you?
Sure, if I can read something to you.
Okay, good.
Okay.
Just war theory is two parts. Jus in bello, jus ad bellum. So the law in time of war and the law leading up to war. Jus in bello, military necessity. States can take action necessary to achieve legitimate military objectives, but international law may prohibit certain measures. Proportionality. Attacks must not cause disproportionate harm to civilians or civilian objects. This has been the crux of the church's critique of Israel. There's no proportionality whatsoever in the Gaza genocide. Discriminations. Attacks must be directed only at legitimate military targets and not at civilians. Again, egregious violations, murdering journalists, murdering healthcare workers, murdering civilians bringing aid to the people, and in addition to that, deliberately targeting apartment buildings, destroying every single apartment building in Gaza. And finally, protection of civilians. Civilians and civilian objects must be protected from attack. These are all covered by the just war theory, and they're all being violated by Israel at this point. So I don't want to weaken it and strengthen the case of the Jewish genocide mongers out there.
I would argue that they can use the just war theory to support what they're doing, because it's a logical shell game and anybody can support anything. You can pick and choose, cherry pick what things in the Catechism you want to use to support your view. But setting aside the Israeli...
Well, wait a minute. Can we distinguish between use and abuse?
No, I don't know. It's just, I remember this phrase from Logos Rising. You were talking about the Talmud, and you were talking about loopholes within loopholes within loopholes. Do you remember when you wrote that?
Yes.
And that's
I think I wrote it. Yeah.
That's what the just war theory is. It's loopholes within anybody can justify anything using it. But I'm not trying to justify what's happening in Gaza.
I don't see how what I read to you are loopholes. These are clear principles, and we can clearly see that they're being violated in Gaza. Where are the loopholes?
I could go through I don't have the Catechism in front of me, but there are other things that the Catechism says. For example, someone was on my podcast and they were trying to justify, they said, well, it says in the Catechism that you have the right to render the unjust aggressor unable to do harm. And there's loopholes when it comes to killing innocent people too. It's not like that's taken off the table. It's like direct killing of innocent people. Anyway, it's what I'm trying to say though is that nothing that's happening in Gaza is anything that didn't happen in Vietnam, that didn't happen in World War II, that didn't happen in World War I. It's not like it's specific because they're not Christians, they're not following the just war theory. And after all, how could we expect Jews to follow our theories anyway?
No, wait a minute. These are universal principles, and this is precisely what is at stake here. These are, do we have universal principles? That is the heart of the Jewish question right now, because there's a group of people who feel that they have super DNA, and so therefore they don't have to follow the rules that everyone else follows, no matter what rule we're talking about.
But we don't follow those rules.
Let me just give, when you're
talking... But those rules are laid out by our church, and we don't follow them when we go to war. So here's one of the questions I asked you.
Stop. Let's talk about a moral imperative like thou shalt not commit adultery. Mm-hmm. Okay, now that's in the Ten Commandments. It's ancient. It's a universal principle, and it has been universally violated ever since Moses came down from Mount Sinai. That doesn't invalidate the principle. The fact that people break the law does not invalidate the law.
Now, another law is thou shalt not kill.
Right.
So that is also a law, right? And so one of the questions that
what we're doing here is basically, okay, we've had that since Sinai, and with the coming of Christianity, we took it, the Christian church, the Catholic Church took it seriously, and let's apply it to war. Let's apply it to the conduct of war. Are there times when it's legitimate to fight a war? Yes. Are there times when it's legitimate to take a human life, even though we have the prohibition, thou shalt not kill? Yes, there are certain times when it's legitimate to do that. Who has the right to do this? The state has the right to do this. And then you have to judge, because that's the just authority. So if the state is there, the ruler, the prince bears the sword, because if there are people who will not follow rational argument, who are consistently opposed to it, they have to be restrained. And part of the restraint that is allowed is to take their life. That's the refinement of that thinking that began with thou shalt not kill.
Well, that's all based on natural law, not on divine law, not on what is divinely revealed by Jesus Christ. Right? I mean, that's all based on natural law. And even the pagans had their own just war theories and ways of justifying killing. That's all human philosophy. And so
are you denigrating human philosophy? Don't talk to the author of Logos Rising. Don't denigrate reason to the guy who wrote Logos Rising. The whole point of reason is to take principles and apply them to a particular situation. The principle is good. The principle is good. Here's the situation. Does it apply? If so, how does it apply?
Right. But we're applying. Okay. We'll come back to that in a second. But one of the questions that I asked you in the essay that I think was the key to the whole essay is, I hear so many Catholics saying that the Jews are dragging us into another war. The Jews are dragging us into another war. And I'm really tired of hearing this, because the question that we need to be asking as Catholics is, why are we so easily led, so easily dragged, and so easily duped into fighting these wars? And so to me, that is a problem in our own church. And we need to start taking the beam out of our own eye and figuring out why are we behaving this way? World War I, World War II, the Revolutionary War. I mean, you just wrote the book on America too, like guns and the Bible. Like this all ties in with your book. I cannot wait to read this book. But we need to ask these questions and focus on taking the beam out of our own eye instead of blaming other groups that don't proclaim to follow the same God we do.
Ellen, this is a false dichotomy.
In what way?
In the sense, are you denying that the Jews are driving us into a war? Didn't we just begin our discussion by Donald Trump?
Why are we so easily led and duped into fighting them?
Okay, Oh, as Tonto once said, what do you mean we, paleface? What do you mean we?
What
Are
I
you
mean is
are
when we
you
fought the
saying
war, when we
are
fought the war in Iraq in the early 2000s, we did that with a military that was 25% Catholic.
right?
So what's with, and it was a preemptive
Why
war
are
that
we?
three
Why
three
are we?
popes three
Why?
popes spoke out against it, and yet we all just fled. So there's a problem here. There's a problem in our own church and a beam in our own eye. We need to look at that and figure that out. And
If if
we can't be
if by this
complacent. We can't be
if by
complacent with this just war theory because yes, I see what you're saying. It is a tool for critiquing injustice in war. It is also a massive problem in that most people use it to justify war rather and justify going to war rather than using it to do what it was meant to do, which was limit Christian participation in war. So it's not working the way that it's supposed to work, and it never has. It's never worked that way. So
no
this is a
no
problem.
that's not
This is a
true.
problem.
That's not true. If you look at the difference between civilian casualties in World War II as opposed, I'm sorry, civilian casualties in World War I as opposed to civilian casualties in World War II, the numbers are reversed. So 90% military, 10% civilian in World War I, and 90% civilian and 10% military in World War II. So it was working. It was working at that time when Christian principles were still strong. What happened over this period of time is the rise of Jewish influence and the decline of the Catholic ability to participate in influencing the people who are in charge. It disappeared over that time. That doesn't change the fact that let's again take it back to
Wait, I'm confused. Can we go back to that? What you said about
I'm not finished. Let's take it back to the sixth commandment: "Thou shalt not commit adultery." Over this period of time, you had exactly the same type of thing happening with the sixth commandment, where large numbers of Catholics capitulated to a zeitgeist that was promoting sexual liberation. My generation, I watched these Catholic girls in Philadelphia succumb to this type of thing. That does not in any way invalidate the sixth commandment. The same way, if Catholics do go along with these wars, that does not invalidate the injustice of the war. Doesn't do it.
okay, so you said that there was 90% civilian casualties in World War II, right?
Yes.
Okay. And so so that's a major problem, don't you think? Because that's a
Of
very
course it is.
unjust
Of
war.
course it is.
Okay.
Okay, if we get back to the crucial issue, it was Winston Churchill who made this decision, one of the greatest villains of the 20th century. But anyway, they did tests, air power. The main reason for this is air power. Okay, so they did tests, and they realized that basically air power is incredibly inaccurate when it comes to military targets.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and so they suddenly realized, well, Europe is densely populated, so we'll just go after civilian projects. It started with the British. Hitler tried to reason with the British. The British would not listen to him. And then the Americans joined in, and they basically conducted an unjust war against the civilian population of Germany. That was wrong. It was wrong, but it doesn't invalidate the principle.
No, right, of course not. I think I want to propose
Well, then we agree that the just war principle is a good principle, but that people don't follow. Can we agree on that?
No, I don't subscribe to the just war doctrine. I think it's
Well,
a huge
but you
flaw.
just did. You just did agree with me that it was a good principle and it should have been followed during World War II, and it was not followed for reasons we could discuss.
Oh no, I don't think there should have been any participation on the part of Christians in any kind of war. I don't think that is something that I can find in the gospel. That's
Now,
not.
wait a minute. Now, wait a minute. Are you a Catholic?
Yes.
Okay. So you don't believe in sola scriptura.
I don't. No.
Okay. Well, then you don't have to find it in the gospel. This is why we have a Catholic Church. We have the greatest thinkers of the West devoting themselves to the most serious problems. And the just war theory is the fruit of that type of thinking among the great thinkers of the West. So, in a sense, who are we? Who are we to question the greatest minds of
That's what I'm
Christendom?
saying. Who are we? That's what I'm saying. Who are we? Okay, so truth is the mind's conformance to reality, right?
Right. That's right.
Okay, so whose mind conforms more to reality? Thomas Aquinas or Jesus Christ? Jesus Christ is the Logos incarnate.
No, wait a minute. No, wait a minute.
He is the
That's
Logos.
a
He is
false
the
start.
Logos incarnate. There's no, who are we to question him? Who are we to question him? He's the ultimate authority. And it's not like he didn't have anything to say about this. He had plenty to say about this. We're just not listening. We're not listening. And even if you look in the Catechism, I've done these podcasts lately just going through the Catechism, anything about just war, nothing ties back to the Gospels. Nothing ties back to the Gospels. And the deposit of faith ends at the end of the apostolic age, right? There's nothing new that we're going to discover like in 310 AD or in 1500.
No, yes, we are. Yes, we are. I mean, what did Jesus Christ have to say about gas deregulation?
Right. Well, okay.
What did Jesus Christ what did Jesus Christ have to say about abortion?
That's not in the Gospels. So we need to use reason to apply what is in the Gospels to these situations. But
Well,
Jesus had
what
plenty
did
to say
Jesus
about
Christ,
violence and war.
what did Jesus Christ have to say about aerial bombardment of civilians during World War II?
You read something to me. Can I read something to you?
Sure.
Okay, so I propose that I'm trying to put this in your terms because I've listened to many of your talks. I think this is a problem of categories. So maybe this is where we can find some common ground. Problem of categories. So have you ever read this book, The Gospel of Peace?
No.
I have this book because of you, because one of your friends.
Yes.
Okay, so she sent this to me. We're in touch.
Good.
Yeah. And so she sent this to me. Her uncle wrote this.
Good.
And so let me just see if I can explain this. I think it's a problem of categories. Okay. And this is your listening to you has helped me to think through this. Okay. He writes another way to and he's, by the way, he does not dismiss the just war theory. Okay. So you'll appreciate that about him. And this has an imprimatur on it. So we're on the same page.
Good.
Okay. Another way to describe the harmony between the gospel teaching on peace and the ethical principles of war is to say that Christianity is not opposed to war as such. To consider war as such is to strip it of the variable circumstances with which it is, of course, always clothed in every concrete instance. And the purpose of doing this is to study it in its essential character. It is to do something like the scientist does when he studies a lung, artificially constructed or preserved or kept alive, and quite apart from the relationship to other organs and the actual conditions. The scientist follows a procedure to study the nature and proper functions of the lung, which is best accomplished by isolating it and observing it under controlled laboratory conditions. So also to consider war as such is to strip it of the actual circumstances in which it is found and of the purposes for which in individual cases it is waged. It is then viewed not in its concrete reality, but rather as an abstraction, as an idea constructed for purposes of isolated scientific study. Yet since, according to Catholic teaching, the circumstances of actions, especially their end, modify or altogether determine their morality in concrete cases, the assertion that Christianity is not opposed to war as such is a vastly different thing from saying that Christianity is not opposed to a concrete instance of war. War as such exists only in the mind. In concrete reality is quite a different thing from what it is in the rarefied atmosphere of the philosopher's brain. So I think what he's saying is that we have an idea in our mind of a just war that meets all these criteria. And it's an abstraction. It's a philosophy. It's a theory. And when there is no, I agree with Ben Salmon, who was a conscientious objector during World War I, who said there is no such animal as a just war. And so I would agree with you that in abstraction, I can picture this situation where it would exist, but it does not exist in real life. And basically, that's what this book says.
Okay, now, if you're saying he's jumping to a conclusion that is a false conclusion, okay, there is such a thing as a just war, okay, but
In your
Father,
mind.
Rosemary's uncle,
In your
what?
mind.
No,
That's a
no,
category
no.
of the mind. In your terms, that would be a category of the mind, right?
Well, of course, the just war theory is a category of the mind.
Okay.
But this particular instance can correspond to that category of mind. There can be a category of reality that corresponds to that category of the mind, in which sense it would be true. Okay, so if you're saying that, let me back up a little bit. What we had a similar problem with vaccines. Okay, now the Pope comes out. There was a Dominican. Now, Dominicans are the heirs of Thomas Aquinas. And so what you have is Thomism here. And I think what you had was the Achilles heel of Thomism, which is basically what I would call ahistorical Thomism. And so he has a kind of Platonic definition of what a vaccine is. Okay? And he deduces our behavior from that definition of vaccine, and he comes to the conclusion, yes, you should take the vaccine. Well, the problem was that did not correspond to reality. That's not what Pfizer was producing. Pfizer created this category of the mind called the vaccine and applied it to something that was not a vaccine. And the church was fooled because of what I would call ahistorical Thomism. So if you want to go back to the World War II, if you define war as the ability to bomb civilians, aerial bombardment of civilians, obviously it's unjust. If that is your definition of war, it is ipso facto unjust, and you cannot pursue it.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That does not mean that you cannot fight a war according to just principles. That does not follow from that.
That's true. But where do those just war principles come from? They do not come from Christ. They do not come from.
Wait, stop.
They come from the mind of humans. It's a human philosophy.
You just told me you were not a Protestant. You just told me you did not believe in sola scriptura. And then you jump back in with this mind of Christ thing. The church is the authorized interpreter of the mind of Christ.
No.
We have 2,000 years of doctrine on various issues which are guaranteed to be correct because of the charism of the Catholic Church.
Well, no, that opens a whole nother issue about the standing of the just war theory in the Catholic Church. And I have a quote here. So no, we don't it does not carry the same authority as the Gospels of Jesus Christ.
Now stop.
I have a quote. Can I read you a quote from La Civiltà Cattolica?
Let me just say,
this was the Vatican magazine, and I'm going to read you this quote. I want to read you this quote. It says, "Now, if we pass from the practical behavior of the Church to Catholic doctrinal positions regarding the problem of war, it becomes clear that theology has sustained the theory of the just war for many centuries, a theory which, however, never became official, which was never blessed by the magisterium of the Church." So this is in the actual Vatican magazine. So we could have a whole different conversation about the standing of this theory in the Church.
I don't know what you mean. I don't know. What does it mean to say that the Church has never said that civilians should be protected from attack? That's preposterous. That is one of the fundamental principles of the just war theory. It is being violated by the Israelis as we speak, and to say that the Church has never said that with magisterial authority, that's preposterous. I don't know what they're talking about.
Well, it's in the Vatican magazine, and I think this is part of the problem, which is why in my essay I was not trying to denigrate the just war theory. I was just trying to say we need to teach it, but we need to teach it and put it in its proper place and its proper context. And we need to teach the history of it too, because it didn't come around until like 300 years after Christ. So there was no such thing for the first 300 years. And so when we teach it to people, we should teach it properly.
Can we stop talking this way? This is not the Catholic way to talk. The fact that, look, the idea of the Trinity did not come into being until 300 years after Jesus Christ. Okay, it is not in the gospel. That does not mean that it is an option that is a fiction of somebody's imagination. It is the sound. It is in the gospel, though.
I guarantee.
No, it isn't.
I guarantee you,
It is not.
if you go to the Catechism, I mean, we should look into this. I can't prove this, but Jesus talked about his Father. And he
So
also said, I'm sending the Holy Spirit. I will not
do you know
orphan.
what
It's in the gospel.
Arius said very clearly? He got a very convincing argument that if the Father, if the Son, there was a time when the Son was not. That is a very powerful argument. This was the Arians were known as oukontes in Greek, not being. Okay, that is a very convincing argument, but it was totally rejected by the church. Okay,
Mike, the church doesn't even attempt, they don't even try to tie the just war theory to anything in the Gospels. Even if you look in the Catechism, it's not tied to anything in the Gospels. It's a separate philosophy that somebody came up with. And
no, it isn't. It grew organically out of the Gospels.
No,
it grew
didn't.
organically out of the moral law, which says thou shalt not kill. It grew organically out of that. The same way that the Trinity, the term Trinity is not in the gospel. It took 300 years of the greatest minds in Christendom who only spoke Greek. That was only Greeks, the Greek fathers who did this. And you had to know Greek in order to come up. This is all philosophy.
That's based on the gospel, though.
If it weren't.
But the purpose of
reason. We're talking over each other.
Okay.
Okay.
But hey, can I just say
the Trinity is not in the gospel. That doesn't mean we can dismiss it as some type of phantasm. You're ignoring the role of the church in explicating and developing doctrine. This is what you're doing here. You're coming with a kind of fundamentalist view of it's not in the gospel. It is in the gospel. Okay, the soldier is not excluded from the communion. If he were doing something immoral, Jesus Christ would have told him. And so all Jesus Christ told them was basically don't bully people and be content with your pay. Otherwise, it's okay to be a soldier. It is not okay to be a prostitute. When the woman caught in adultery, he says, go and sin no more. He did not say that to the soldier.
No, all of the church's teaching on just war is based on natural law, not on the Gospels. They don't even attempt to tie it to what Jesus said because it's in clear contradiction. So that's part of what my essay was about.
Are you saying that natural law contradicts the gospel?
I'm saying that we need to interpret the natural law in terms of Jesus, because he's the ultimate interpreter of natural law and he knows what natural law is.
So when did Jesus contradict natural law?
I'm about to run out of my time. Do you mind if we continue this for like 15 more minutes?
No, that's fine with me.
Okay. Let me just, it's going to cut off here and then I'll just send you another link, but I want to get back to the idea of categories.
Okay.
Because I was trying to find ways we could agree. Okay.
Okay. Keep trying.
Okay. I will. All right. All right. We're recording now again. So, okay. Let me just tie it back to what I was saying about categories, because I think this is really going to win you over. I think I'm going to get you on my side here. Okay, so I asked, why are we so easily led into fighting these wars? Why are we constantly dragged, even if it's the responsibility of someone else, even if someone else is doing all the dirty work, we're right there participating in what is clearly evil. Okay, or many of us are. So here's what I think the problem is. I think I can get you to agree with me. First of all, do you agree that there are two traditions in the church? There's the just war tradition, and then there's another nonviolent tradition that is just as valid as the just war tradition.
No.
You don't think there's a nonviolent tradition in the church?
I don't think if you're talking about pacifism, no, it's not a part of the Catholic teaching. The church has never taught pacifism. Never.
Oh my gosh, you're proving my point. Okay, so there is, the USCCB came out with a letter. It was called "The Harvest of Justice is Sown." The harvest of justice is sown in peace, or something like that. And they said that the Catholic Church has always had two traditions. And they've always been, there's two streams of the tradition, is how they put it: nonviolence and just war. And they say these two streams have always been in tension with one another. And we know that there's a nonviolent tradition because, of so many saints who decided to die nonviolently instead of fighting in self-defense or whatnot. And all the early martyrs, of course, like sacrificed their lives. They were not participating in war. They would rather die than, do any of that. So there are two traditions. But
Oh, no, no, wait, no, no, you're pulling a fast one here. You cannot justify martyrdom. You cannot equate martyrdom with the defense of innocent life. That's two different things. They do not contradict each other. There is a tradition that the Catholic tradition has never been pacifism. Martyrdom is not pacifism.
would you agree that a Catholic, although there is a just war theory, a Catholic could choose to be nonviolent instead of
Oh,
fighting
sure.
either?
Well, a Catholic can choose any number of things, but to
Okay.
say that his choice is based on the consistent teaching of the Catholic Church, that's another thing.
Okay. Well, I guess but you would agree that one could make the choice to be nonviolent, and that would be in line with Catholic teaching.
Sure, if you want to say that, yes, okay, just
Okay.
simply yes, okay.
Okay. Okay. So we have these two streams of the tradition, and
No, wait, but that's not the same thing. You're changing horses in midstream here. You're talking about individuals making particular choices in particular situations. That's not the same as the church thinking through the implications of "thou shalt not kill." They're two different things.
okay. So you would admit that it's not a scholarly tradition in the church, but it is a practical tradition. Like people throughout history have chosen to follow Christ and love their enemies unto death, as opposed to killing and fighting their enemies. And that goes all the way back to the apostles, really. I mean, they all died. They didn't fight in defense. They didn't like have skirmishes on the road with like Romans or anything. Like,
That's not the just war theory. We're talking about individuals. We're talking about the role of the state when you're talking about just war theory. Okay.
okay,
The first criteria, principle of jus ad bellum, which is the law into war, is competent authority. A decision to go to war must be made by a legitimate authority, such as a sovereign state or an international organization. By definition, we're not talking about individual decisions here.
well, so you don't think that an individual has a right to self-defense?
Of course I do. I
Okay.
absolutely believe that an individual has the right to self-defense. I am not a pacifist in any way, shape, or form. If you want
Okay.
my honest opinion about the situation in Gaza right now, I think it would be a just war if the United States invaded Israel and put an end to the genocide in Gaza. I think the
Okay.
United States should organize an international coalition of the kind they did with Iraq, which was an unjust war, completely unjust war, but they would be right to take leadership and organize a coalition to basically defend the people of Gaza. I am not a pacifist.
Okay. All right. Well, I'm going with the idea that there are two traditions as stated by the bishops, the nonviolent tradition and the just war tradition in the church. They're not two traditions, but they're two streams of the tradition, whatever that's supposed to mean. Okay. So just war theory, you can look it up in the Catechism, and we have all these categories of the mind, right? We have defense and aggression versus we have proportionality, we have innocence, and we have direct killing versus indirect killing. We have all these kinds of, it's very fleshed out, and they are all categories of the mind, but they are there, and we can think in those terms. Part of the problem, and what I'm saying, the reason that so many Catholics go to fight these wars is because when it comes to the other tradition, we don't have any categories in our mind except this word, pacifism. And that is a huge problem because that means we actually can't think through it. And if you can't have the thought, then you can't live that way. And so all I'm saying in my essay that you refuse to publish,
Keep saying that.
all I'm saying in that essay is that I think that we should teach both. And I think that, I've sent you some materials by Father McCarthy in the past. I don't know if you ever listened to them, but I think that one of his great contributions to the church is explaining logically, just like you have logic to back up self-defense according to natural law. There is a logic to gospel nonviolence. It makes sense and it's theological. And what he does is he gives us the categories so that we can think it through and think about it, just like we can think through just war. And so all I'm saying in my essay is we should have both. But part of the reason there's so much cognitive dissonance when it comes to this issue is that we don't have the categories of the mind. All we have is love your enemies and pacifism, and we don't know how to think through it logically. So what he has done is he has used reason to explain it logically. And my feeling is if you would give that a chance, if you would open your mind just a little bit and give it a chance.
Are you saying all we are saying is give peace a chance? Is that what you're telling me?
I am saying that when Jesus was by the River Jordan, didn't God come out from the clouds and say, there was a voice from the clouds and he said, "This is my beloved son." What do you know the second part of that?
With whom I am well pleased.
And then listen to him.
Listen, I try every day. I try to listen to him.
Listen to him. And then.
But you're claiming he was a pacifist, though.
The Great Commission of the Church. I know you tell people this all the time. You say, "Go get baptized."
Right.
Yes, we are supposed to baptize, but then it says, "Go out and baptize them, teaching them to obey all that I commanded you." Teaching them to obey my commands. And even Mary, her last words in the gospel, do whatever he tells you.
Okay, let me play. Two can play this game. If you go to St. Peter's Basilica, on the base of the dome, there is "Tu es Petrus et supra hanc Petram edificabo ecclesiam meam." So you are Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church. And the gates, that's it. But and the gates of hell will not prevail against it. Whatever you bind shall be bound, and so on and so forth, along that line. That is the instrument. It's not up to individuals to individuals only insofar as they are thinking with the mind of the church along this period of time. It is the church that makes this decision, and the church has basically no tradition of pacifism. You can say there were individual Catholics.
That's why you dismiss an entire tradition of the church that goes, it's older than the just war tradition. You dismiss it entirely.
It doesn't exist.
And you disparage it because you say, give peace a chance. And this is because the only category in your mind is pacifism. Like, you have never actually studied this or thought through how logically it could be, how this nonviolent tradition is actually theological. And it's the other one, when you compare the two, it's the other one that doesn't make sense. But that's what I'm saying. That's what the problem, why Catholics keep going and fighting all these wars, because we have the categories of the mind when it comes to the just war, but we don't have the categories to even think about the other way. That's why we constantly dismiss everything that Jesus says, because we're like, well, that doesn't really line up with just war, but just war makes sense. But no one has ever explained it. And that's why I think Father McCarthy it's just, he's like, the way that he explains it, it lets you actually get those categories. So you don't even have to think in terms of, I have a whole episode called "Why I'm Not a Pacifist." Like, I'm not a pacifist. That's not what
what are you then? What are we arguing about then? I'm saying that pacifism is not the part of the tradition of the church. It's not.
Well, pacifism is just a rejection of war. So, I mean, you don't even have to be a Christian to be a pacifist. There's lots of.
What about the Quakers? Are they pacifists?
I think they were at one time. I don't know if they still are.
Well, I think they still are. But the problem with Quakers is they are hypocrites. And I'm saying, if you're a pacifist, you have to be a hypocrite. And Ben Franklin is the one who brought this out, because if you're a pacifist, you have to basically willing to hand over your property and your life to some thug who wants to take it. And I don't see, that's an irrational proposition. And the Quakers understood that it was irrational, and they got around it through their hypocrisy. So they're not allowed to provide bear arms, but we'll call it a fire engine, and we'll buy a fire engine and it's really a cannon. Or we'll hire proxy warriors and they will do our fighting for us. So pacifism, as actually practiced, leads to hypocrisy. And the church is not going to be hypocritical about this. Either you have a right to defend yourself and your family and your property, or you do not. And the Quakers say clearly you do not. You have to let that happen. But they don't let it happen anyway because they know in their heart it's irrational.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Maybe. I think what I'm thinking about as you're talking is that there's another problem here, which is that the church exists to save souls, right? Like, and it doesn't really exist to teach philosophy to heads of state. And so that's kind of another problem.
Did you read
here.
Logos Rising?
Parts of it.
Okay.
It,
this is a fundamental turn.
What I'm talking about is
let me just back up here. A fundamental turn in human history came when John wrote his gospel in Greek, and he said, Logos is God. No one had ever said that before. I'm trying to say everything that we're talking about, all of this thought, whether it's the Trinity, whether it's just war theory, whether it's gas deregulation, whether it's sodomy, this all comes from the use of reason. God gave us reason so that we could extrapolate from principles and deal with the situation as it exists today, like today. And so what the category of the mind is, okay, let's say that it's this. Protection of civilians. That's the category of the mind. Is this what is happening in reality in Gaza? No, it is not happening. So therefore, we can condemn this behavior. If we cannot condemn this behavior, we just better just pack it up and let the powerful rule over us with no restraint. We'll just roll over and play dead. The fact that Catholics have gone along with this is to their shame, every bit as much as the Catholics who have committed adultery over this period of time during the sexual revolution is to their shame. But their behavior does not discredit the norm.
Okay, this brings me to my final point. I just want to ask you quickly about robots, because I've been thinking a lot about AI, okay? And so it's this question of, a lot of people say that war happens because of sin, and it does. I mean, the church even teaches that war comes from sin, period. But I also think it's a problem of categories of the mind. So I was thinking, if they have these new robots, right? I was like, oh, how can we just tell everybody the just war theory so people in war will finally start following all the rules, and we can make war safe, legal, and rare, right? If we all just follow the just war theory. But it never has happened, never will happen. So I'm like, okay, the robots are going to come along, and that's going to be the worst case scenario, because then we won't even have human beings fighting in these wars. We will have robots fighting the wars. I think we all know that's just around the corner. So I'm like, oh, what a nightmarish scenario, because they don't have a conscience. But then I was thinking, actually, maybe this will be good, because we can just program the robots with the just war theory, and then they'll follow all the rules when they fight the war, right? And then it got me thinking, is the reason that we don't obey rules in war because we are full, our passions get involved and we can't, stop once we start fighting, and we're not that logical? Or is the problem that we don't have the proper categories of the mind because we aren't fleshing out the teachings of Jesus in a logical way, the same way we are fleshing out the thoughts of Thomas Aquinas in a logical way?
I think we do have the proper categories, but no category, no matter how proper, is going to override the fact that the will is free. And the will can always override whatever norm that is the good for some type of personal benefit that is destructive of the common good. So that happens all the time, and it's going to happen in war. What you have, let's be specific here. I love specificity. Let's go to Benjamin Netanyahu. Benjamin Netanyahu is in a position of power where he has to have the United States attack Iran, because if he fails in this to do this, he will end up going to jail. So he's choosing his particular good and willing to sacrifice thousands of lives so that he can stay in office. That's wrong. And no norm in the world is going to compel the human will or make the human will be unfree. The human will, God created the will to be free because he can't create rationality without free will. And so he has to accommodate free will. Every norm can be violated. That doesn't mean that the norm is wrong. It just means that the will is free. And that's not a problem. Because, it is a problem, okay? But God decided that, knowing everything, that in the long run, it would come out better. Good would prevail over evil. And the best story in this regard, if you want to be sola scriptura, is the story of Joseph in the Bible, where he's basically sold into slavery in Egypt, but rises to the top. Famine breaks out in Israel, and they have to come to him, and he reveals who he is, and he says, "The evil that you intended to do to me has been turned by God's power into good." That is a justification for free will, and that it means that there's no way you can stop people, once they get wicked people, from killing other people because they can see some personal advantage in it. We have to stop those people. The great shame right now for the entire world is that nobody can stand in and stop Netanyahu from continuing this genocide. That is a shame for the entire world. I hope, by the grace of God, that Trump, in his megalomania, will turn on Netanyahu and stop this thing. But you cannot take the sword from the prince, because the prince is the legitimate authority in this, and he has the right to wield the sword, to use physical force to protect the innocent. And that is precisely what is not happening right now in Gaza.
Yeah. And I would add that I don't think any of these problems can be solved. I mean, war has its own logic. Violence has its own, it's like a mechanism of evil. And once it starts, it's very hard to stop. And it started a long time ago. It started a long time ago. So what's happening in Gaza today didn't just start on October 7th. And so I think it would be good for us as Catholics to think about, are we just reaping what we sowed? I mean, are we reaping what we sowed? Like, this, Israel didn't just come out of nowhere. It came out of World War II, which came out of World War I, which was the Great War of Christendom. Every state behaves this way.
All right.
Every
If you
state
want
has
to say,
always behaved this way. This is how states behave. They kill people. They have a monopoly on violence. And so we have to ask ourselves, is this all coming to a head? And it really is, in a major way, in terms of...
If you want to talk about complicity of the Catholic Church in Gaza, I think we could make a case, if you went back to Vatican II, to Nostra Aetate, where the church says the church condemns all forms of anti-Semitism. They ran up the white flag in dealing with the Jews. This is not, I'm not questioning the status of the document, but I'm saying you can't say something like this without defining anti-Semitism. And the fact that you did not define anti-Semitism meant that over this period of time, the Catholic Church gave carte blanche to the Jews to do whatever they damn well pleased, and that has led to Gaza. So that was wrong. But make sure you get.
But the Jews did. I mean, World War I and World War II were definitely, I mean, millions, tens of millions of people were killed, and those were waged by mostly Christian nations. So the Jews have only had a country for a very short period of time. So it'd be different if, like, we had set a different precedent, but we didn't. They're just doing what every other state does.
I think we're going to have to agree to disagree. That's okay. I don't see it that way at all. So Anyway, I think that we're going to have to end here because we both said what we believe. I think where we're going to have to leave it there.
Okay. You think the problem is the JQ. I think the problem is the JWQ. Does that summarize it up pretty well? Okay.
Are you accepting? Do I agree with what you said?
I think that we both see that there's a different problem at the heart of all this.
The just war theory is not a problem.
It's a huge problem.
It's the solution to a problem.
It's never solved. Then why is it happening? If it's meant to fix this problem, then why is Gaza happening right now?
Why are people still committing adultery after 5,000 years after Moses came down from the mount? The answer to that is because the will is free. Okay, that does not invalidate the sixth commandment.
Okay,
that's it.
Fair enough. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks
Good
for having me.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Peace.
God bless. Peace.
Salam.
Shalom.